Welcome back to Comics Are Dope. I'm BJ Kicks, and this is episode 24 of Comics Are Dope, the podcast. I'm really excited for you to hear my conversation with comic book writer David Pepose. But before we get into that, I gotta say, man, I feel like this year is the year of the licensed comic. Like, there are tons of properties from my childhood and from childhoods before mine making their way back into comics. Like, I mean, as I'm recording this, I just finished reading Dick Tracy #1 from Mad Cave Studios. Really, really good stuff. Dynamite just released a bunch of covers for Powerpuff Girls #1. We're about a week away from Free Comic Book Day right now. And the book that I am most excited about for Free Comic Book Day is the Johnny Quest Free Comic Book Day issue. Like, I don't know, man. Something about all these properties from when I was a kid, from when my parents were kids, making their way back into comics just does my heart good. Speaking of properties making their way back into comics, Dynamite Entertainment, who has my vote for Publisher of the Year so far, they just announced that they have the rights to Terminator. And I guess what's great about that is this year marks the 40th anniversary of the first Terminator film. And to celebrate that, Dynamite is reissuing a ton of Terminator comics. So if you're familiar with the Gargoyles campaign they did a couple months ago, this is very similar. There are 3 volumes of Terminator content, collecting most of the stuff that was done originally with Dark Horse, including the Terminator Burning Earth, which I believe is Alex Ross's first published work in comics. But literally 3 over 300-page volumes of Terminator content coming your way. The Backer Kit campaign is live now, and it closes on May the 7th. So you can get volume 1, 2, or 3 in a paperback. You can get it in a hardcover. The next stretch goal will have it seeing that will increase the trim size of the hardcovers from a standard size hardcover to like a deluxe sized hardcover, which will make it as tall as a Marvel or DC omnibus. So I'm hoping that we get past the $200,000 mark, because oversized Terminator would just be dope. But anyway, lots of really cool stuff. So check out that Backer Kit campaign. Like I said, it closes on May 7th. So you got a little bit more than a week to get your orders in. But speaking of Dynamite Entertainment, Dynamite is actually launching a Space Ghost series. As you're listening to this, or as this is released, it's this coming up Wednesday, May the 1st. We'll see the release of Space Ghost #1 from writer David Pepose and artist Jonathan Lau. I read this issue. It's amazing. You're gonna want to read this book. And I don't know, maybe it's the nostalgia talking for me, but I assure you, there's more to it than just the cool character design, and you may be remembering 30 seconds of this animated series from when you were 6, because I don't know. Anyway, I'll let you listen to my conversation with David, and I assure you, by the time this hour is over, we will have convinced you to pick up Space Ghost #1 when it hits stores this Wednesday, May 1st. And without further ado, I'll let you listen to my conversation with David. So guys, my next guest is a Ringo Award-winning comic book writer. You may know him from such titles as Savage Avengers, The Devil That Wears My Face, most recently The Punisher, or upcoming from Dynamite Comics, which is what we're here to talk about today, is Space Ghost. Please welcome David Pepose. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to chat with you on the show. And I can't wait to talk with you about all things Space Ghost.
Yeah, man, I'm excited for it too. It's funny because like my exposure to Space Ghost, I mean, I'm 33, right?
Yeah,
So I had Hanna-Barbera reruns that I didn't realize were reruns from Cartoon Network. And
sure.
then there was Space Ghost Coast to Coast. And that's pretty much it, right? Like, so my memory of Space Ghost is he looks cool and he shoots stuff out of his arms.
Yeah,
And that's kind of it, right? So
yeah.
I think it's really fun that we get to revisit Space Ghost in comics, and especially this take that I won't
Thank
spoil. But so I guess before we get into Space Ghost, for those in our audience who may not be as familiar with you or your work,
Sure.
maybe like just some brief career highlights. Like, who are you, man?
Yeah. I'm David Pepose. I'm a third generation comics fan. My mother grew up reading comics. My grandfather was a comics fan. I grew up reading Amazing Spider-Man 346. That
Mm,
got me kind of hooked for life. Yeah, I got my start as a DC Comics intern. I worked on books like Final Crisis and Batman R.I.P. I worked as a comics journalist for about a decade. I was the
mm,
reviews editor at Newsarama.
mm,
Um, and yeah, I think it took me a long time to kind of take the chance on becoming a comics writer.
mm,
Where actually it's so funny. This week marks my 7 year anniversary
mm,
as a published comics writer, and my very first book was a book called Spencer and Locke, which
mm.
was what if Calvin and Hobbes grew up in Sin City. And people seem to really respond to that book, and so I've been writing ever since. And so I've been lucky enough to work on titles like Scout's Honor over at Aftershock, The Devil That Wears My Face over at Mad Cave. I've been working consistently at Marvel for the last 3 years. I've worked on
Mm,
books like Punisher, Savage Avengers, Moon Knight, City of the Dead,
mm,
and tagging in on books like Fantastic Four and Hulk and Darth Vader, Black, White, and Red.
mm,
And yeah, I'm really excited because I've known Dynamite Comics for a long time. I've known Nick Barucci over there for about 15 years,
mm,
and so every time I had a new book, I would make sure that I'd send them a copy. And so it's nice that I finally got the call from them at New York Comic Con last year. They had just announced a new partnership with Warner Brothers Discovery to do a whole line of licensed comics. And my editor, Joe Ryvant, said, "We're doing Space Ghost, and you would be our top pick. Would you have any interest?" And yeah, the character is really cool. I mean, if you don't know who he is, he's basically what if Batman fought crime in the Star Wars universe. And
mm,
I thought there's so many cool things that could be done with a character like that, a character who hasn't had a whole lot of comics exposure besides really kind of a handful of miniseries. So it
mm.
really felt like unexplored territory, and I've been very, very excited with what we've been doing on Space Ghost so far.
Yeah, no, it's really fun. I got to read a preview of issue one, and no spoilers coming from me, but you guys definitely want to check it out, right? Like, because again, my exposure to Space Ghost, like I knew who he was, I'd seen him. Like I remember, like maybe just I'm old. I guess I'm not that old, but I feel old talking
Yeah,
about the way reruns used to work,
sure.
right? There was a time when you couldn't just pick what you were going to watch on TV, right?
Yeah,
Like you
yeah,
knew what channel you wanted to watch and what might come on. And,
right.
unless there was a set programming block, you never knew what was coming during that time, right? So
Yeah.
some of my favorites as a kid, Flintstone Kids would come on like in the
Mhm.
middle of the school day,
Yep.
a pup named Scooby Doo. But
Mhm.
you would get like these super random, like Hanna-Barbera shows,
Yeah.
Wacky Races,
Mhm.
Penelope Pit Stop, Dastardly and Muttley, all these things, right?
Yeah.
But every now and then you'd get Johnny Quest or you'd get Space Ghost.
Yeah.
And Space Ghost just had like this, they were really short episodes. I went back and
Mhm.
watched some on YouTube. I never realized how little happens in a Space
Yeah.
Ghost episode, right? But
5 minutes a pop. Yeah.
right. And so it's like they basically there's like a villain of the week
Mhm.
or a villain of the hour, I guess. He's got some plan to take over the
Yep.
galaxy, and Space Ghost just comes in and thwarts that plan.
Yep.
you know,
Yeah.
I think the cool part about Space Ghost is one, his design, right, by Alex Toth, right? Like
100%.
the dude just looks cool. Um, but then the other thing is Space Ghost has a bunch of sidekicks. So you've got like the brother and sister, and they've got like a pet monkey.
Yep.
Like, and that's
Yep.
just like what? Like, I don't know. As a kid, it just
Yeah.
spoke to me. Like, there's
Yeah.
not, I don't know. It's weird because I grew up in the 90s. So we've got Batman the animated series and Spider-Man and all this stuff.
Yeah.
But Space
You're just
Ghost
vibing
was
on
just,
Space Ghost.
yeah, it was dope.
I think you hit the nail right on the head. I mean, I think Space Ghost, is endured for as long as he has, exactly based on the design and the vibes.
Mm,
Uh, and I think that's the thing that really drew me to this project is Space Ghost has all the ingredients of an A-lister. I mean,
right.
you've got the Alex Toth design, which is, you've got the sort of the Batman style cowl, but then it turns into this like wavy yellow cape, and then you've
Hmm.
got the all white suit, which really cuts like a nice contrast against like kind of the Flash Gordon-y sci-fi
Hmm.
backdrop of every
Right.
episode. And then you've got this amazing array of powers. He's got his power bands, which give him power over fire and ice and lasers and force fields,
Mm-hmm.
and also his invisobelt, which allows him to turn invisible to make him an actual space ghost. And then I think you said something really interesting. Was yeah, he's got the trio of sidekicks. He's got these twins, Jan and Jace, and their pet monkey Blip. And
Mm-hmm.
that really stood out to me for my take on Space Ghost is if you have somebody like Batman, for example, he's got
Mm-hmm.
Robin, but like Batman often has adventures on his own. Like there's a degree of accessorizing when it comes to
Mm-hmm.
kicks, and I think it gets reinforced by the fact that it's generational.
Yeah.
You'll always have a new Robin,
Mm-hmm.
but that means oftentimes you can still get a Batman story that feels like a Batman story without a Robin in it.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think that's the case for Space Ghost. I think having three sidekicks, that's that pattern. That's I think a very deliberate statement. And
Yeah.
at the time, I think it was really smart. It was a way to kind of bring in younger viewers. If
Mm-hmm.
you're a young boy, you can relate to Jace, and if you're a young girl, it's not going to be like, oh, this is boy stuff. You're like, oh, there's Jan. Like
Right.
I can relate to her.
Mm-hmm.
And then, yeah, having a pet monkey. I mean, that was sort of the style of the time in the Silver Age. But also, it really struck me as such a deliberate choice. You could have had any animal mascot, but you choose a monkey.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we were developing the series, I had a quick thought of like, should we include Blip? And I realized like, well, if we don't, it's like making a sundae without the cherry on top. It's like it's such a deliberate choice. And then you
Right.
top all that off with like this amazing rogues gallery. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Alex Toth was just throwing out fastball after fastball, where even though the episodes don't really have a lot of character development,
Right.
you still get like a set of vibe based on
Mm-hmm.
each of these villains, based on sheer design. You have somebody like Zorak, who's like a homicidal praying mantis, or you have Metalis, who's kind of got he's got this armor that covers up any features that you might recognize him in. You have like Creature King. I love that big-headed weirdo. Like all these characters. Brack, who he's got the mask, the face that looks like almost like really unsettling.
Right.
Uh, and the fact that I think he's got every bit as of iconic a rogues gallery as somebody as Batman or
Mm-hmm.
Spider-Man or the Flash. But the thing is that the advantage that I have on this book is Spider-Man and Batman and the Flash, they've spent 60 plus years examining all of those rogues. Whereas for Space Ghost, the original cartoons really only had them for a couple of episodes each. And they've made sporadic appearances in some of the comics.
Mm-hmm.
There was Zorak that appeared very briefly in Joe Kelly's run, his origin story on Space Ghost, or Metalis showed up a bit in
Mm-hmm.
Future Quest Presents by Parker. But the fact that like none of this has really been explored, especially in the comics medium, it was irresistible. I was just like the ability to take all the lessons that I've learned at places like Marvel and Mad Cave and Aftershock, and to apply them to a brand new universe that I could kind of build up from the ground up. You don't get many opportunities like that as a writer. It's a real gift, and
Right.
being able to kind of take these characters and follow them on this emotional journey, while kind of pitting them against a gauntlet of all these iconic bad guys. Yeah, it's such a fun opportunity.
For sure. So you mentioned like just the sort of the brief comic history that Space
Yeah.
Ghost has. So your series, is it sort of wiping the slate clean? Are you kind of walking or tiptoeing around what's come
Brand new
before?
continuity, brand new jumping on point, and that was for a couple of reasons. Some of that was pragmatic. I wanted to
Mhm.
make sure that nobody needed to do any homework to read this series because I think there's a whole generation out there that doesn't know who Space Ghost is, or they only know him as the talk show host from Coast to Coast. And
Right.
so I wanted to make sure that like, no, we're returning Space Ghost to his roots. We're taking that classic sci-fi superhero vibe, but instead of sort of the Silver Age camp of the 60s, which
Mhm.
was very product of its time, we're taking all those vibes and we're sort of reimagining them as what if this came out in 2024?
Mhm.
What are the storytelling sensibilities behind that? So I wanted to make sure that it was a very clean jumping on point for anybody, that you didn't have to watch any of the original episodes, you didn't have to read any other comics, but also I think from an ethical perspective, we're working with Dynamite Entertainment. They have
Mhm.
the rights to Space Ghost, and so I didn't think it would be right or possibly even illegal for me to be like cribbing continuity from another publisher.
Mm.
So just I figured it was easier to just kind of just say, okay, wiping the slate clean, brand new starting point. And that way it also kind of gives us a lot of wiggle room to really take these characters and expand upon them in like really cool and interesting ways.
Yeah.
Particularly the villains. Like I said, you have the vibes and you have the design. So
Mhm.
for me, I rewatched every single episode. I took very detailed notes on everything. And I thought, what about these characters appeals to me? Somebody
Mhm.
like Brack, for example. Brack's not out there trying to take over the universe. He's almost blue collar. He's trying to
Right.
hit the nearest gold freighter.
Mhm.
Um, there's an opportunistic streak to him, and so I took I said, how could we address that kind of opportunistic streak in this universe? And so we threw in like a fun little twist on Brack that I think kind of speaks to that.
Mhm.
And so we're doing that with all the villains. As somebody like Zorak, who I see as the scariest villain that Space Ghost has. He's a
Yeah.
praying mantis, so he
Mhm.
sees everything from an inherently alien perspective. Um, how do we kind of play that up? That this is the villain that even kind of spooks Space Ghost a little bit. And how is his point of view so inherently alien to something that we might have?
Right.
And so we're doing that with all the villains. And by having sort of that clean slate, we're able to do that. But also, so much of our series is really the emotional journey. It's
Mhm.
about how Space Ghost comes into the orbit of his sidekicks, how Jan and Jace and Blip, their colony is attacked by space pirates, and so
Mhm.
they're just it's their good luck that Space Ghost happens to show up to save them. And that's really the through line of our whole book is how do these kids go from being orphaned rescues to becoming trusted sidekicks to becoming really a found family in their own right.
Yeah.
And so we're really starting it. If Joe Kelly's run and Ariel Olivetti's miniseries was sort of a Batman Begins origin of Space Ghost himself,
Mhm.
I would say this is kind of like a Batman Year One take on the entire team. How do they
Gotcha.
come together and become a unit? And so, yeah, it's been a really fun journey to explore with these characters.
Nice, nice. So you talked about how you watched all the episodes of Space Ghost, right? I watched a few just in preparation for this conversation and to get
Yeah,
refamiliarized with the character. And then when you read issue one, if you are someone who's watched the animated show, you're gonna find like a decidedly different
sure.
tone.
Yeah.
What were some of the inspirations for your Space Ghost?
That's a great question. Yeah, for me, this book especially, I'm really trying to go for a contrast.
Mm,
I didn't think that I could not write the camp energy of the original '60s show, and like I said, I think that was very much a product of its time.
yeah.
For me, I feel like, all right, I think there could be like a traditional superhero take on this.
Mm,
Because we've got all the ingredients. So a lot of the inspirations that I took, I'd say tonally were somewhere between Batman the Animated Series and Batman the Long Halloween.
mm,
I think there is something to be said about sort of the shared iconography of somebody like Space Ghost and Batman. But I also see shared DNA with things like Superman or even Iron Man, or
mm,
and to a much more limited extent, even like the Punisher.
mm.
But yeah, Batman, the Long Halloween and Batman the Animated Series was a big one. Lone Wolf and Cub was another big influence on that. J.J. Abrams' Star Trek.
Mm,
I love that movie, and I thought that was such a cool way of reintroducing these iconic characters to a generation that had no idea who they were. I certainly was not familiar with James T. Kirk,
mm.
and I only knew Spock through like cultural osmosis. And I saw
Right.
that movie, and I was like, oh, I get it. I
Yeah.
get why these characters endure. And so that was really something that we're trying to do with this is to say, okay, if you only know Space Ghost kind of tangentially, if you only know him through cultural osmosis, we're going to show you why he's super cool.
Right.
Uh, so for me, it's of course we have the moments that are of seriousness and the action moments and the moments of tension and drama. But I like that we kind of have a nice contrast to it. And I think that's because of Jan and Jason Blip.
Yeah.
Having these kids playing off of each other, there's a sense of humor behind it. I wrote them as like Dick Grayson and Babs Gordon
Hmm.
meet Lex and Tim from Jurassic Park. There's like a precociousness to them. There's like a
Yeah.
sense of humor. Um, a fun fact about me is I'm the older brother of a set of triplets. So I
Mm,
know really firsthand what the multiple dynamics look like, how an entire hierarchy can change if you're born 1 minute ahead of the other one. And so I've been really kind of playing around with that with Jan and Jace, where like Jan's the oldest by a minute, and she and Jace kind of bicker
mm,
as twins are wont to do. Um, but yeah, I think it's been really having those characters. They really add a nice sense of humor and a
mm.
warmth and a sense of wonder to it
Yeah,
all. And we're really, I think, seeing this series arguably through their eyes, in
yeah.
the same way that like Kitty Pryde was the point
Hmm.
of view character for the X-Men 2 generations ago. That's
Hmm.
how I feel about Jan and Jace, and I think that was kind of my through line through this book and my way to kind of approach it in an original way. Is back in 1966, Space Ghost shows up fully formed. He's got the sidekicks. He's got his routine already locked in. But there's no continuity. There's no backstory to any of these episodes. They're 5 minutes a pop.
Right.
And I thought, oh, well, like how did he come to acquire two kids and a monkey? And I realized like, oh, this is the story of Space Ghost as kind of the ultimate single dad. And
Mm,
he's in a little over his head with all that. And he's going to realize that these kids are they're forcing him to really reckon with his own humanity a bit, something that he hasn't had to do in his years of isolation and his own crusade against space pirates. And so, yeah, he's going to kind of learn what it's like when, your heart's running around on the outside and
mm,
how vulnerable that can make you, but also how that can make you kind of grow and heal as a human being. And so, yeah, it really is. It's a family story in a lot of ways. And I think it really speaks to a lot of the found family themes that I love to explore in my work, going
mm.
back to Spencer and Locke or work like Savage Avengers. If you liked anything that I did in those books, I think there's certainly some shared DNA with Space Ghost. And it's made this, I think, one of the most fun books I've ever worked on.
Nice. Nice. Yeah, you mentioned just kind of the shared iconography between like Space
Yeah.
Ghost and Batman. Fun fact for the audience: Greg Capullo, when he's drawing Batman, says that
Mhm.
he's just drawing Space Ghost and then adding ears. Like he just
Did
loves
he
blacking
really?
out. Yeah, he says he's blacking out he loves to black out the cowl completely because he just loves that Space Ghost design.
I'm gonna tell Dynamite that. I did not know that, but that is a really cool bit of trivia because Greg is one of my favorite artists. His run on Batman was spectacular. I grew up reading his X-Force
Mm.
and his work on Spawn. So yeah, wow, thanks. That really makes my day to hear that.
Oh, no problem. No problem. So, it's funny 'cause like I said, you mentioned like what that kind of has in common and just the even being inspired by Long Halloween, right? So,
Yeah,
the artist on this series is Jonathan Lau,
yeah,
and there's no way for me to spoil the art on a podcast, right?
yeah,
But when you guys see this book, like it's wow. There's a page when Space Ghost appears, and it reminds me so much of The Long Halloween, right? Like
yeah,
my favorite part about Tim Sale's artwork in Long Halloween
yeah,
specifically is how Batman is almost always like the biggest, most imposing, scariest thing on the page, right? And you
yeah.
really get this sense that whoever the villain of the week is terrified by his presence. And that's exactly the type of entrance that Space Ghost makes in this book.
Yeah, that's boy, you nailed it right on the head. I had not made that connection with Jonathan and Tim Sal, but I think you're dead on.
Mm,
I think Jonathan, I've been a huge fan of his. He worked on a Green Hornet relaunch with Kevin Smith
hmm
about this was 15 years ago. Wow, time flies. And that was my introduction to Jonathan's work. I think he's just a powerhouse of an artist. He has a really fun sense of movement and energy
hmm
to everything. And you only saw the first issue. I can tell you he's got a sequence in issue 2 that honestly like is already head and shoulders above anything else he's drawn.
mm,
Um, yeah, he does these great explosive blockbuster moments,
yeah.
showing the power that Space Ghost has with all of his technology. But he's also able to switch gears to these really nice human moments.
hmm
We've got a really emotional beat at the end of issue one, with Jan and Jace as they, without spoiling anything, kind of, they're coming to terms with like, their life has changed pretty unimaginably in the span of only, a couple of hours.
Hmm.
And Jonathan, I think, really understood the assignment that this is an ensemble book. It
Yeah.
would be so easy to relegate the kids as background characters. It would be
Hmm.
so easy to just view them as accessories or just be like, well, all the spotlight in Space Ghost. But Jonathan knows how to share that spotlight with all the
Yeah.
characters. I think if you fall in love with these characters in the way that I hope you will, I think it's Jonathan doing a lot of the heavy lifting there.
Yeah.
He's making the characters really stand out, and he's making them look really emotional. And yeah, I think he's doing the work of his career on this book,
Mm.
quite honestly. And he's working with Andrew Dahlhaus on colors, and Jonathan and Andrew have worked together in the past. They're a real well-oiled machine. I was lucky enough to work with Andrew last year on a Miles Morales short.
Mm.
In Carnage Reigns Alpha. So I know full well, what a talented professional that Andrew is. And so the two of them working together, it really is, it's a nice kind of alchemy. I just saw the colors on issue two, or I think a good chunk of issue two this week, and
Mm.
Andrew's doing stellar work on it. And then we're kind of rounded out by Taylor Esposito, our amazing letterer. I owe Taylor a great deal. He and I have been friends for a long time. He introduced me to my very first colorist, the late Jason Smith
Mm.
on Spencer and Locke. And so I really do owe Taylor my career. So, but with the exception of a two-page anthology story that hasn't seen the light of day yet, Taylor and I had never worked together before. And so
Mm.
it's nice to finally kind of actually get to do that. And
Yeah.
just in the same way that a colorist can really elevate line art, a good letter can really elevate dialogue. And
Yeah.
Taylor does such a great job at kind of adding, making sure that my one-liners connect, but also adding like a nice little bounce, a little cartooniness to some of the more explosive beats. And so it's really nice to be working with a team that they're all so passionate about the project, and
Yeah.
it's really kind of inspiring all of us to bring our A game with everything. So yeah, I feel like I couldn't be in better hands with a creative team like this. And also, I will say I want to give a shout out to our partners in this. Dynamite and Warner Brothers. This is the best licensed book experience I've ever had.
Mm.
I've worked on several licenses like Conan the Barbarian and Star Wars, and Dynamite and Warner Brothers has been so encouraging. They've given us a ton of latitude. They understood from the jump. There's no backstory here. There's no continuity.
Mm.
So they've been really encouraging and saying like, well, flesh it out. Like, follow your instincts. What do you think would be the most dynamic and character driven way of approaching all this? And so they've given us a ton of latitude. I'm in the middle of issue five right now. And I think I can count on one hand the number of notes I've gotten, and they've all
Mm.
been pretty minor. It's like, can we tweak this line here? Or can we tweak this one panel here? So they've been wonderful to work with. And I think, yeah, I think this kind of book is really all the fun of the superhero genre.
Yeah.
But the one distinction is that we don't have to share any of the toys. And so
Mm.
I think we get to do like we want a villain, we use them. But
Yeah.
it also it's a daunting challenge because it means you got to take a big swing on every single one of them.
Yeah.
And thanks to having Jonathan and Andrew and Taylor, I think we're really swinging for the fences with this one.
Yeah. Nice. Nice. No, I'm really excited about it. Now, you're working on issue 5 now. Is this planned as an ongoing, or is there an
Yeah.
end in mind?
So when Dynamite first approached me for this series, they said, "Hey, like, do you have an idea for like a year's worth?" And so
Okay.
we've got a little over a year planned. But that said, there's room for more. There's room to slot in more stories if the demand is there.
Mm.
For me, the way that we're structuring this, we're doing primarily done-in-one adventures.
Okay.
And I took a page out of the playbook from a lot of other writers, a lot of my colleagues that I really respect. People like Jed McKay on Moon Knight, or
Mm.
Ryan North on Fantastic Four, or Steve Orlando on Scarlet Witch. And yeah, I saw the thing that they were doing in common was a lot of their stories were done in one. They were very self-contained. And for me, it was always going back to people, I know there's a generation that doesn't know who Space Ghost is.
Yeah.
So how do we get people to know those characters? We rack up the adventures as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
So we're doing a lot of done in one adventures, also because Space Ghost has so many iconic villains that we wanted to
Mm.
use many of them as possible. So yeah, that means that every month, you're going to get a cool self-contained story, but also the handful of times that we do a two-parter. Um, it gives those cliffhangers the maximum impact. If
Gotcha.
it says to be continued at the end, that
Mm.
means like Space Ghost and company are in dire straits, and they're going to
Right.
have to fight twice as hard to get out. And I did a two-parter on Fantastic Four last year, and I think
Mm.
that really showed me the power of a two-part story.
Mm.
That especially if you're doing all these done in ones, that if you're suddenly extending it across two issues, that means that it's a big bad guy. It's one of Space Ghost's most dangerous enemies.
Mm.
So yeah, well, it was really trying to be very deliberate with the structure, but we've got big plans. This is the longest runway I've ever had on a series. I would say really, unless you're a title like Batman or Amazing Spider-Man, it's very hard to kind of get a lot of runway these days. The market is in such a volatile place.
Yeah.
So I consider this book about as ongoing as one can be, but I do have like a distinct beginning, middle, and end for it because the number one thing that I am always concerned about is I never want to overstay my welcome in a book.
Mm.
I would much rather let readers want more than say, oh, that guy lost it, that guy fell off. And so, and I think books like Savage Avengers, really, I think reinforce that for me, where we
Mm.
wrapped it up in 10. Marvel had given us a 10-issue commitment on it. And I was so happy with how it ended, but I was even happier with seeing how many people said, oh, we would have loved to see more.
Yeah.
And that's how I always want to go out. I want to go out while we're still on top, rather than people being like, okay, we're done with this guy.
Right.
Thank God he's off the book. But yeah, we've got some really cool plans with it. And I think it also speaks to having a character like Space Ghost where we don't have to make him endure for 60 years.
Yeah.
We don't have to write stories in a way where it's the illusion of change. We really
Mm.
are able to give him like a full, thorough character arc. And so I think by the time that we do wrap the series, when we inevitably do wrap the series, I intend to leave Space Ghost in hopefully a better place than when he starts out.
Yeah. No, I mean, again, just from issue one, it's an amazing start, right?
Thank you.
It's my favorite iteration of Space Ghost so far. Um, so you were talking about just sort of the research you've done, right?
Yeah.
You've read all the Space Ghost, you've watched all the Space Ghost. In the research, what was maybe the most surprising or fun fact that you
Ooh,
found about him?
that's a great question. Let's see. There are a handful of things. I think honestly, it was kind of watching Jan and Jace.
Mm.
It's one of those things to have a character like Space Ghost himself. He was kind of fully fleshed out, and that character makes a lot of sense to me from like an iconography perspective.
Mm.
But seeing Jan and Jace, they were actually pretty fully formed in personality, and you can kind of like that dynamic makes a lot of sense to me.
Mm.
And we're sort of taking a lot of that dynamic, but kind of bringing it into the 21st century. We're sort of scrubbing off maybe some of the little more dated elements. But for example, Jan's the thoughtful one. And I think she's in a position that a lot of only girls are in, where like she's expected to think things through because like the dumb boys in her family are not going to do so.
Right.
But I took it as, in our interpretation is like that, she's kind of feisty. Like she's very assertive. She knows how to put her foot down. She's the one who tells off Space Ghost to his face. Uh,
Mm.
and Space Ghost, he'd rather fight the asteroid field than deal with like the wrath of like a 13-year-old girl.
Right.
Uh, we wanted to give her some teeth, so she's a crack shot with a blaster.
Mm.
Like she's the one who did blaster training on Space Colony Omicron. So you don't want to mess with Jan.
Mm.
And then meanwhile, Jace, I think at the time in the 60s, it could occasionally be like a little misogynistic's too harsh of a word, but
Yeah.
like a little patronizing towards the women.
Yeah.
And Jace, I think, occasionally did that. And so for me, I wanted to kind of recapture that as more of it's the kid brother energy, even though he's a minute
Hmm.
younger. He's sort of he's the impulsive one, he's the goofy one, he's the one whose emotional maturity is probably closer to Blip's than it is to Jan's.
Hmm.
But I see it also as Jan and Jace being kind of like yin and yang.
Yeah.
Jan feels like she has to be responsible to keep her
Hmm.
family together. Whereas Jace feels like he needs to be the one that brings up the morale. He
Hmm.
needs to be the one who cracks the jokes, who tries to make people laugh. Because if they're not laughing, then they're not going to be together. They're not going to stay together. And
Yeah.
I think that's like a really sweet characterization for the two of them. So
Hmm.
watching them play off of each other and then having them play off of Space Ghost. Space Ghost, when you meet him, he's kind of this grim figure of the cosmos. And that's because, without spoiling too much, he is kind of the sole survivor of his own space pirate attack.
Yeah.
And that sort of inspired him to fight crime across the galaxy in a universe that's too big for the Galactic Patrol to effectively protect.
Hmm.
Uh, but he's been alone. He's been, living on Ghost Planet by himself for years. And so I always saw it as, this is a man who's sort of pretending at being a monster. He calls
Hmm.
himself Space Ghost. He hasn't had to reckon with his own humanity for years because he's never had anybody, he's never had anyone in his life since his
Hmm.
family died. And now he's got these two kids. And, he has not built his life, he's not built his mission for children.
Right.
And so that's going to be a big adjustment period for him. In a lot of ways, it sort of adds a little bit of drag to his life. Just that, he's got to check in with these kids and he's got to
Hmm.
protect these kids, got to make sure that they don't get into mischief. But at the same time, while he starts off maybe a little abrasive towards these kids, um, as he gets to know them, like he can't help but warm up to them. And
Right.
that's been such a fun evolution for
Hmm.
for for this entire cast, is you kind of watch them. At first, there's some friction, there's some real butting of the heads, but then like Space Ghost, in spite of himself, starts feeling very protective of these
Hmm.
kids, and he realizes that maybe subconsciously, if not overtly, they're complementary, or their tragedies are complementary,
Hmm.
and that's what I think sort of makes them this perfect found family unit. And
Hmm.
then of course you have Blip, who I don't want to spoil too much, but I'd say he's the linchpin of our whole series.
Yeah.
He's the reason the entire narrative comes together, and I love the character because he's got a sense of humor. He's mischievous. He's very food motivated, but also, he doesn't talk,
Yeah.
and so you have to really play up the acting and the visual comedy with a
Hmm.
character. And Jonathan's doing such a great job with it. But Blip has layers, and I'm very excited to be exploring them. We've got a Blip centric issue coming up. I think I'm writing that in like a month or two.
Hmm.
And that is, I think, if I nail it the way that I would like to nail it, it'll be my favorite issue of the entire run.
Hmm.
He's such a fun character who loves those kids, and so having them, that's really been, I think, like the big, not challenge, but I think the standard that I've been trying to set myself up to is to make sure that like every character gets a beat in the spotlight in every
Yeah.
single issue. That they all have something to do. And so the fun thing about Blip is like a little bit of Blip goes a long way. And
Yeah.
so it's like, okay, like what kind of moment can I give for him, knowing that his presence can have an outsized impact
Hmm.
compared to the human characters. So it's been like a fun kind of balancing act.
Yeah.
But I love writing ensemble books. I always say that, like, in the same way that like evolution always wants to turn everything into a crab, I
Uh-huh.
feel like for me, like I want to turn all of my books into ensemble books,
Hmm.
even if they're not ensemble books.
Right.
They're always at least a two-hander,
Yeah.
going back to like Spencer and Locke. But
Hmm.
books like Going to the Chapel, books like Savage Avengers. I love writing teams, and
Yeah.
so having those really distinct voices and personalities and skill sets all playing off of each other.
Hmm.
Um, that's fun for me. I know there are
Yeah.
some people who prefer single character books versus teams, but I could not be more opposite. Give me all the characters you can.
Yeah.
We'll find room and we'll find something fun for all of them to do.
Yeah. I enjoy a good team book as well. I think if it's done right, you
Yeah.
can learn a lot more about a character by putting them in a team, right?
Yeah.
Like by
How to
giving them
play
the
off of somebody.
opportunity to exactly. How do you
Yeah.
interact with these people? You know, we know that Batman is like, super broody or whatever. We know that
Yeah.
him doing that as a single character, right? But we feel it even more so when one of the Robins or Wonder Woman like kind of
Yeah.
make fun of it, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
like I
Exactly.
enjoy I enjoy a good team book. Um, Even as you describe like the ambition you have for this ensemble, it kind of reminds me of Kyle Higgins on Power Rangers, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I guess there's a lot of parallels, like, right, this being like a series that's has like an established sort of thing, right? We
Yeah.
know it as campy in a lot of ways, but there's a lot of potential there for just interpersonal conflict, and then all these sort of massive world building pieces, right? Like that series was really well done in a way
Yeah.
that I didn't expect to get from a Power Rangers book, right?
Right.
And I see some of the same things in this
Oh, it's such a
Space
compliment. Thank
Ghost.
you. It's funny. You keep making connections that I hadn't made, but they're very smart. And I think I'm gonna use that in future interviews. Is that like you're dead on. Is that yeah, a book like Power Rangers? Of course there was the nostalgia factor.
Mhm.
Of course, like I grew up watching Power Rangers. I love that show. I watched the first season or two, and I watched the original movie. But yeah, it's like you grow up and you're kind of like, oh, this story is like they're not like the most sophisticated things in the world. Like
Right.
you were there for the spectacle of it all. And so yeah, creators like Kyle Higgins and Ryan Parrott, were able to kind of take that ball and run with it and sort of say, okay, like how do we elevate this? Like how do
Mhm.
we stay true to these characters and bring the things that we love about them to life, but also like yeah, how do we do a serious take on this? How do we do a more sophisticated take on it? And yeah, I think I keep coming back to like Space Ghost feels like a new frontier in a genre that doesn't have many of those.
Yeah.
Most superheroes have been kind of colonized, at length, and really, reinterpreted over and over and over again across a variety of not just comics, but film and television and video games and action figures. And Space Ghost, not really.
Mhm.
You've got the original series and then Space Stars, the revival,
Mhm.
in '81. But otherwise, yeah, it's reruns and then it's coast to coast.
Yeah.
And then a handful of superhero takes, between Future Quest, or between the Joe Kelly run, and Future Quest Presents, and then sort of the jam band in the original Future Quest series that Jeff Parker did.
Yeah.
And then yeah, some Archie books as well.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, it's like, oh, this is a character that like hasn't had his own solo series in like 20 years.
Mhm.
That's a whole generation's worth of readers.
Yeah.
And so for me, my goal is to kind of like, you don't have to know this character. If
Right.
anything, I would love it if you're just coming to this curious, because
Mhm.
I would love to prove to you why this is a superhero story that could stand on its own merits,
Yeah.
not just based on nostalgia. But if you are a diehard fan, we got all sorts of cool Easter eggs for you, and
Mhm.
I hope that you're excited to see the way that we're kind of taking these characters and these villains and just kind of building on them,
Yeah.
for a 21st century mentality, a 21st century reading audience, and yeah, it's just I feel very grateful, this that I was sort of approached and offered this book and seeing the amazing ingredients that were all in there. And it's just
Mhm.
like, oh, well, yeah, you have ingredients like that. Yeah, you can cook a pretty nice dish.
Yeah, for sure. So one thing I like about these, 5-minute episodes, right?
Yeah,
And just even the nature of just done in one storytelling, like you're doing with this, right? You can kind of create these worlds and just live in them for a little bit. Um, because Space Ghost is in space, right? So every planet, like it's all fictional. So it can be whatever you want it to be, right? So
yeah,
we're out in the annals of space. You've got like something could be like either super futuristic or like there's a take on like prehistoric people and tribes, and there's
yeah.
like tribal outfits and all this different stuff. What sorts of worlds are you excited to sort of get to create and visit
Oh
on this
boy.
journey?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, for me, well, it all starts with the villains. It's always
Mm,
figuring out like what's the best context for each of these villains and where can I place them. And so, some of them will be kind of in more populated areas.
okay.
We have an issue coming up with the widow, from the Council of Doom, and
Mm,
so seeing her operating in a little bit more of like a sci-fi metropolis, not maybe a little bit of almost like a Blade Runner vibe to
hmm
to that planet. Whereas somebody like Creature King, for example, yeah, he might be in a place that's got a little bit more jungle flora and fauna,
hmm
or somebody like Metalis, where it's going to be a little bit more of like kind of a war zone,
hmm
um, because he's this guy who he's basically a general of all these robotic troops. I see him as sort of like Doctor Doom meets General Zod meets Bane.
hmm
I'm very much looking forward to writing him. Whereas like Zorak, like Zorak kind of operates in the shadows, and like
Yeah.
the places that he operates are kind of creepy. Like he's probably the closest thing we have to like a horror villain,
Mm,
in
yeah.
the run. So yeah, we're going to be kind of like playing off different places. For me, the only thing that's really important is that I like when there are civilians involved.
Yeah.
And I think the reason I think that it's something that my editor at Marvel, Tom Brevoort, really impressed upon me, and it's something that I've always tried to take into consideration since our very first series together, is the thing that makes superheroes heroic is not punching out villains.
Mm,
It's saving the little guy.
yeah.
That's the reason why they do what they do. Otherwise, it's very dynastic. Otherwise, it's very insular and sort of self-referential.
Mm,
And so for me, it's always about, how is Space Ghost protecting the little guy? And
yeah.
so from our very first issue, that's how we introduced Jan and Jace, is it is Space Ghost protecting the little guy. And then eventually, as they kind of find their feet, they're paying that forward and they're protecting civilians. And I think that's such a cool thing. And so for me, it's always, I will always try to gravitate towards having civilians in some form or context, even if it's very brief, just to keep reminding people that like Space Ghost it's not vigilantism for vigilantism's sake. It's always about trying to protect other people from the tragedies that shaped his life. And I think that's the thing that kind of gives him a little bit of that inherent nobility, despite having some rough edges, despite being, at first a little crabby, about these kids that he's taken in. But ultimately, at his core, he's a good man.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think that's something that will certainly be will play into the types of planets that we're in. I don't know if we'll ever see. Well, sorry, I'm thinking about it real quick. My outline. Um, yeah, I mean, I think the most uninhabited planet we'll probably see is Ghost Planet.
Mm,
We've got some fun stuff planned for Ghost Planet. I really wanted to make sure it kind of lived up to the name a little bit, and so yes, so you will see all sorts of cool like spaceship graveyards on that planet.
nice.
But yeah, it's yeah, you really kind of hit it on the head that that's the cool thing about Space Ghost is you can tell all sorts of stories. All
Mm,
you can play with different genres and different tones and different influences, and they all feel organic. And
right.
uh, that's sort of the stuff that I love to do. I get very restless, and so the idea that I can tackle a book that I'm going to say, I feel like writing a heist issue this month, and so
Mm,
I do. And I'm just going to say, you know what, I could go for a little bit of like a horror tinged vibe this time. All
yeah.
right, let's do it. Or just like, oh, hey, like I want to write a good old fashioned bank robbery.
Right.
What's a character that I can do for that? And so being able to do stuff like that, and it all feels like legit, that it doesn't feel like I'm going like way out of left field.
Right.
Uh, yeah, you don't get many books like that. So, it really it encourages me to really kind of take that ball and run with it.
Yeah. Nice. So, Space Ghost #1 is out May 1st, 2024. So, got a little bit of time. This episode will probably come out right before. So, definitely
Sure.
go run to your comic shop and grab it. I pre-ordered 3 covers
I
because
appreciate that.
the A cover is amazing. I think my favorite objectively is the Michael Cho cover
Hmm. I've
because
heard
it
a
just
lot of people say that.
It
That's my
just
son's favorite. Yeah, he did such a sensational job, and I believe he's on. I think he's scheduled for 12 issues. I think he said. So, you if you like Michael Cho, you'll be well fed for our series for sure.
when you see it, it's the cover that just looks like the animated series the
Yeah.
most to me. And all the sidekicks are on it, like just is
Yep.
amazing. Um, and then there was like this unlockable variant that had an Alex Toth like character design
Yeah.
sheet. So I pre-ordered that one. I don't need three copies of the same book, but I'm doing it, right? And you
Well,
should
I appreciate
do
it.
the same.
No, I listen. The thing is I want people to show Dynamite and Warner Brothers that there's a demand for this book, and I
Mm,
think I know Dynamite was saying like they think this thing's going to sell out. They're pushing retailers like up your orders because like I
yeah.
think you need them. But yeah, I think this is the kind of superhero story that everybody says they want.
Mm,
They say they want the done in one stories. They say they want, a long running creative team. They say they want kind of like a big meta arc to kind of connect everything together.
mm,
But they also want stories that aren't just like totally, that aren't as beholden to continuity, that are accessible for people to read. And, we're listening.
yeah.
This is exactly all the input and consideration we're putting that into this book. And yeah, I think I'm working with just a top shelf creative team and working just on some of the like most fun characters you've never heard of.
Mm,
So yeah, if you like superhero stories, if you like sci-fi, you don't have to be a nostalgia head to get into Space Ghost.
yeah.
But if you are one, you'll also enjoy it. So
Right.
yeah, and yeah, if you want to get me to sign your copies, I'll be signing at Free Comic Book Day weekend. I'll be at Emerald Knights Comics in Burbank on Free Comic Book Day, and the Comic Bug in Culver City that Sunday. So and yeah, I'll be at San Diego Comic Con. I might have some copies of the Ash Can at C2E2
Mm.
in a couple of weeks. So yeah, find me. I would love to chat Space Ghost with anybody who's interested, and happy to sign any of your stuff.
Yeah, that book is absolutely selling out. I forgot it's free comic book day weekend. So definitely run to your shop. Don't walk, and you probably want to get there before Saturday. If you don't get there by Saturday, it's probably going to be gone.
Yep.
But before you get out of here, we've got a lot of like aspiring comic writers
Yeah.
in the audience. And something you said earlier stood out to me. You were talking about how you kind of play double dutch on your way
Yeah.
into the industry as a writer, and you kind of talk about this trepidation you had. And then I contrast that with a statement you made a few minutes ago about like, I think I'll write a Western today. I'll write a horror thing today,
Yeah.
right? Where does that confidence come from, and how does maybe an aspiring creator capture
Sure.
it?
That's such a great question, and I'm gonna flip it on its ear in that um, every day is a fight against imposter syndrome.
Mm,
Every day you're kind of like you're relearning how to write. Every single project that you do, you're kind of like, oh, how do I do this again? Because every
mhm,
project's different, and some of them are easier than others. I was literally I'm putting finishing touches on an outline today that I've been beating my head against a wall for 6 weeks on.
mm,
So like that took a little while. I think for me, the way you build confidence is it's you rack up the experience. And so the way that I always recommend people doing it, this is the way that I did it, is write a short story every day. Doesn't have to be
mm,
long, 6 to 8 pages. In comics, that is not that long.
yeah,
6 to 8 pages. Do it every day. Do it for a month. They don't have to
mm,
be good. All they have to do is be finished. And I can tell you, I wrote some real bad scripts.
mhm,
But you learn by finishing. And so you finish that script and you're like, okay, this is what I hate about that script. You
mm,
will then think about that for the next script. And then you'll finish that script and be like, that's what I hate about that script. And listen, if you feel like you haven't learned anything in 30 days, do it another 30 days. You will learn something. It's you putting in your reps. I would say also, I mean, just kind of be as well versed in the industry as you can be. Kind of get to look at credits. Look at not just the writer, but say who's the penciler, who's the inker. Are there multiple inkers? Sometimes there are. Who's the colorist? Who's the letterer? Who are the editors? All that will really help you out. And then I think when you feel ready to actually make your own book, you make it self-contained.
mm,
My first three series were 4 issues a pop. And that's really like the magic number. I mean, if you can tell a story in 4 issues, you will get into any single publisher that every single publisher is interested in 4 issue miniseries.
right.
And so being able to kind of do one, all you got to do is one.
Mm,
I promise you, the first one will be the hardest thing you've ever done in your entire life. But that's okay, like as long as you finish it.
mm,
Uh, and then that becomes your calling card for more work, because
got it.
it's always the hardest when you haven't done anything.
Yeah.
And there's an argument to be made, if you want to dip your toe into the pool with that, anthology work. There's a lot of anthologies out there. But I think it's just you start small, you get your reps in. And if you're feeling stuck, what inspires you? What are you interested in? If you like, my favorite movie is Memento.
Mm,
And so that was a big influence on my first book, Spencer and Locke. Or, are you into sports? All right, what's a sports movie that you can draw from? Or do you want to write something, about like a sci-fi sports team? That's all
mm,
valid. Um, and I guess the other bit of advice that I have is you're allowed to write out of order. I do it all the time. Just because you read something sequentially does not mean you have to write it that way. If
mm,
you're thinking about a car chase today, write that car chase. The worst case scenario is you will find out pretty fast, oh, all I got is a car chase and there's nothing to this concept. But
right.
more often than not, you'll find out that like anything is better than a blank page. You
Mm,
can, and heck, if you spend all day writing something, and even if you toss out 95% of it the next day, you have still written something. You've still written all the crappy words out in time for you to start writing the good words. So, yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of amazing resources out there as well. There's books like Sid Field's screenplay, Stephen Pressfield's the War of Art.
mm,
It's amazing. It's a must read for anybody who wants to do a creative field. Brian Bendis has an amazing book in writing comics, as does Peter David. If you really want to get nerdy into the weeds of it, Laus Egri, The Art of Dramatic Writing,
mm,
very good work on characterization. And there are classes for this sort of stuff too. I'm a big proponent in comics experience. Andy Schmidt runs that program. He was the editor on on Annihilation,
mm,
when the Guardians of the Galaxy first debuted,
yeah.
the movie cast. He does classes on writing. He does classes on penciling, inking, coloring, lettering. And so if you can afford those classes, they are real. It's a great way to kind of learn the craft and get
Mm,
some nice feedback. But you don't need any of that. I mean, honestly, at the end of the day, all you need is a pen and paper. You can draw your own stuff. You can Xerox them. You can make zines. You can go to cons. You can go on the internet and find, an artist anywhere around the world, and put stuff together. It's a garage band mentality.
mm,
Uh, and I will tell you, as somebody who tried every stable job in the book before I kind of dipped my toe to the deep end of the pool and accidentally fell in
mm,
with my first book. Uh, it's the hardest job I've ever done, but it's the
mm,
most fulfilling job I've ever done. I would never, I mean, I bleed this, I bleed Comics Inc. I would never in a million years have expected that I would be where I am today, but I'm so grateful every single day. And if I can do it, anyone watching can do it. Yes, keep writing. Just get it done. That's my advice. Anything is better than nothing. So, good luck with everybody.
nice. That is amazing advice, man. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. So again, Space Ghost is out May 1st, Space Ghost #1. And then The Devil That Wears My Face, you've got issue
Yeah.
6 is out the
Issue six.
following week.
Yes. Yeah. For those who haven't read that book, it's my first horror book. I'm so proud of it. It's Face Off meets The Exorcist. It follows Father Franco Vieri. He's an 18th century Vatican priest grappling with a real profound crisis of faith.
Mm,
He's called by his superiors to perform an exorcism on the son of a Spanish nobleman. And unfortunately for him, the ritual backfires. So he is stuck in a stranger's body while the demon known as Legion has taken over Vieri's body to wreak havoc back at the Vatican. Super fun horror book. Alex Cormack is on art. He's doing the work of his career. I think one of the best horror artists of his generation.
mm,
Uh, and yeah, we've been kind of tearing a bloody path through the streets of Rome throughout our first 5 issues, and it's all coming to a head in issue 6. We've got a really fun twist that nobody's guessed yet, that I think turns the whole series on its ear. So I can't wait for people to read it. It's when you read it, you'll sort of see like why this book is so personal to me, why it's so near and dear to my heart. But yes, you can pre-order issue 6, and I believe issues 1 through 5. I'm sure you can back order from Mad Cave Studios. Just tell your local comic shop you want the book, because yeah, I would say even if not for me, Alex is just doing such sensational work that you really owe it just to see what a modern horror master looks like.
Nice. Well, David, I really appreciate you taking time
Oh,
to
it's my
talk to
pleasure.
us about Space Ghost and everything else. This has been really good, man.
Thank you so
Um,
much.
oh, no problem at all. Where can people find you online?
Yeah. So you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Blue Sky at Pepose D. You can follow David Pepose Comics on Facebook. You can visit my website. It's currently under construction at davidpepose.com. Or you can subscribe to my newsletter, Pep Talks, at bit.ly/pep news.
Pep Talks is an amazing name for a
Thank you.
newsletter. That is awesome. Awesome. Well, guys, again, thank you so much to David for taking time to speak with us. Go out, grab Space Ghost. I grabbed Space Ghost. It's fun. You're gonna like it. I promise. I guarantee it. And I don't know what else you're doing today, but whatever you're reading, make sure it's something dope. Peace.